We'll just,
Our song for gathering is number 361, and our rejoice and come in. Stephen's going to get his music out, and then we'll be ready to sing. So.
Thank you, Bo and Stephen. While Nina Tolley rings the singing bowl, and Howard will light our chalice. Please join me in the chalice reading, which is a little different than the one we usually do. May the light we now kindle aspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. Good morning. And welcome to St. John's Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Claire Wagner, and I am your worship associate this morning. St. John's has a rich history of being a beacon of liberal religious thought right here in Cincinnati, working for social justice and celebrating diversity. We are pleased to be designated a welcoming congregation by the Unitarian Universalist Association, and as such, we honor and value the racial, economic, cultural, age, physical ability, sexual orientation, and gender diversity of members and visitors. I extend a special welcome to anyone who is a guest this morning or a visitor. Please join us for coffee afterwards in our fellowship hall across the lobby. You will find information about upcoming events in your order of service. A quick reminder, please do turn off or silence cell phones or other noise-making devices. Again, welcome to all here and online. We are pleased that you have chosen to worship with us this morning. Our next hymn is number 121, We'll Build a Land.
Good morning, St. John's. 50 years ago, Nina and I moved to Yellow Springs, Ohio, and discovered a Unitarian fellowship, which we joined. And posted on the wall was an affirmation that Unitarians had recited since 1894. It appears in our hymnal at number 471, and we adapted it as a family grace for our evening meal. And as a delegate to the upcoming UUA General Assembly, I've proposed an amendment to a proposal that love become a central value in our bylaws by adding several lines from this affirmation. So would you please join with me in reading this affirmation? Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you.
Now is the time in our service where if you have a joy or concern that you want to represent in a shared bowl of stones, that we invite you to come up, choose a stone of your liking, and then place it together. And if you have anything you wish to be read aloud, please write it down. Some of the chairs have little pockets on the back with pieces of paper, and leave it on the table for me and Howard. Those at home, if you have a joy or concern, please do put it in the chat. It might take Bridget walking her computer up here, but we'll read them. Thank you. Howard is placing extra stones in the bowl to represent joys and concerns unspoken. It is good to remember that the flame burns as brightly for joys or for sorrows. Or not as brightly for both. It's equally out right now. Howard's ready for the story for all ages. Howard, it's on.
Children and young at heart are welcome to come up. Can I be heard? Would you believe I have two stories for you this morning? They're both about school kids. And when I went to school, way back in the 1950s, as a child, every morning during homeroom, we recited the Lord's Prayer in unison, and then we took turns reading from the Bible. So I would like to ask for a show of hands among the adults. Any of you who went to school way back then, if you had a similar experience, is there anyone else here who did the Lord's Prayer and or a Bible reading in a public school? Could you show hands? And those online, could you report that in chat? All right. Thank you. Our message today is about the United States Supreme Court. And no longer do public school children say the Lord's Prayer or read from the Bible, because the Supreme Court said that violated the Constitution to compel people to say something that might be contrary to their own free exercise of religion. And so since that time, the only thing you guys are required to do, as far as I understand it, is to say the Pledge of Allegiance and to salute the flag. Now, the first story is about some Jehovah's Witness children. And Roberto, can you show on screen a picture? This is what those children were required to do in 1942 by their school. And if they refused to do it, they were punished, and their parents might be prosecuted. Now, that's not the way we salute the flag today. We were at war at that time, and our enemies used to salute the flag like that. And so we changed our flag salute, so now it's done this way. Now, I'm not going to tell you the end of the story, what the Supreme Court said when some Jehovah's Witness children refused to do it and were punished. They and their parents got a hearing in the Supreme Court, and if we could show the picture of the book, in your class today, you will be getting a lesson that tells you the answer to the story out of this book, The Supreme Court and Us. And I'm going to tell the answer to the story to your parents or grandparents, so you can all talk about it afterwards. Next, second story. Would the two of you who are wearing black armbands stand? And Roberto, would you show on screen? These two high school students were Unitarian Universalists, brother and sister, named John and Mary Beth Tinker. And because they opposed war, and they wanted our Air Force to stop dropping bombs just for 1 month during the Christmas season, bombs in Vietnam. They wore their black armbands to school even though they had been warned they would be suspended, not allowed to return until they took off their armbands. Well, they had two younger brothers and sisters who went to elementary school, and they got away with it. The principal in that school didn't punish them, but these two were expelled. And they also said to the U.S. Supreme Court, we have a constitutional right to express our ideas. And the Supreme Court agreed with them. And they said the Constitution and the Bill of Rights does not stop at the schoolhouse door. So this story has a happy ending, and now we will happily sing you off to your class.
I see no joys or concerns left on the table. Bridget, were there any online? None online. I would like to share a personal concern. A close neighbor and a relative are both beginning chemotherapy in the next week. Please keep them in your thoughts.
Claire, the train disaster in India.
Oh, yes, sorry.
The escalating war in the Ukraine.
As Unitarians, let us also turn our thoughts and prayers to the train disaster in India, where so many lost their lives and many more were injured, and to the ongoing fighting and flooding in Ukraine caused by Russia's aggression. And by the way, the light came on in the bowl. Please now join me in a moment of calm and meditation. This is The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests, in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Now is the time for our offertory, where we take a collection to support the good works of this church.
Could you please join me in number 402, and we'll sing this through twice. From you I receive.
For our reading today, I will share some background and excerpts from Justice Robert Jackson's decision in West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, a case decided at the U.S. Supreme Court in 1943. First, in 1940, by a vote of 8-1, the Supreme Court upheld the expulsion of 2 Jehovah's Witness children in the Gobitis family for refusing to salute the flag based on state law that threatened them with reform schools and their parents with prosecution for juvenile delinquency for causing it. Felix Frankfurter, the only Jewish justice, a Democrat appointed by FDR, wrote the majority opinion upholding the expulsions. Harlan Stone, a liberal Republican, wrote the only dissent. 3 years later, the court overruled that precedent 6-3 in West Virginia versus Barnett, reversing the expulsion of the Jehovah's Witness children and upholding their First Amendment rights. Stone had been elevated to Chief Justice, and FDR had also selected 2 liberal Democrats to fill vacancies. Stone assigned the Barnett decision to newly appointed Justice Robert Jackson, who subsequently took a leave in Nuremberg to prosecute Nazis for the Holocaust. 3 liberal Democratic justices, including the only Catholic on the court, changed their votes from the Gobitis case and now supported free exercise. Frankfurter dissented along with 2 other Democratic appointees. Jackson wrote, "The flag salute, quote, requires the individual to communicate by word and sign his acceptance of the political ideas it thus bespeaks. Objection to this form of communication, when coerced, is an old one, well known to the framers of the Bill of Rights. To sustain the compulsory flag salute, we are required to say that a Bill of Rights, which guards the individual's right to speak his own mind, left it open to public authorities to compel him to utter what is not in his mind. The 14th Amendment, as now applied to the states, protects the citizen against the state itself and all of its creatures, boards of education not accepted. While it is the 14th Amendment which bears directly upon the state, it is the more specific limiting principles of the First Amendment that finally govern this case. Parenthetically, the state can impose any rational restrictions on commercial entities, but, again quoting, freedoms of speech and of press and of assembly and of worship may not be infringed on such slender grounds. They are susceptible of restriction only to prevent grave and immediate danger. To believe that patriotism will not flourish if patriotic ceremonies are voluntary and spontaneous instead of a compulsory routine is to make an unflattering estimate of the appeal of our institutions to free minds. We think the action of the local authorities in compelling the flag salute and pledge transcends constitutional limitations on their power and invades the sphere of intellect and spirit, which it is the purpose of the First Amendment to our Constitution to reserve from all official control." End quote.
Thank you, Claire, for voicing so well that powerful opinion. My homily this morning will provide an overview of the judgments about free exercise, LGBT rights, and abortion made by U.S. Supreme Court justices, the ministers of America's civil religion. Citizens recite the Pledge of Allegiance and salute a flag. UUs recite an affirmation and light the chalice. Presbyterians recite the Lord's Prayer and revere the cross. Our civil religion hymns include a national anthem, Battle Hymn of the Republic, America the Beautiful, and more. Harvard and Yale law schools have been like seminaries for the justices, and now the renamed Scalia Law School at George Mason University and Notre Dame have special ties to the justices. Our Constitution's Bill of Rights provides for the court a textual basis comparable to UU principles or the Ten Commandments of Christian doctrine. The Constitution's First Amendment commands, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." The 14th Amendment commands, quote, "No state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws." The reasoning behind that language was because its authors had fled Europe, where bloody religious wars between Catholic and Protestants were uppermost in their minds, as well as the theocracies that established oppressive state churches that persecuted minority faith communities. Supreme Court First Amendment decisions upholding exceptions from state law for religious minorities to enjoy free exercise, nevertheless, can be viewed as a violation of the Establishment Clause because they give to churches favored treatment, such as exemptions from paying property taxes. Reconciling majority rule and the minority rights of Amish, Quaker, Santeria, Jehovah's Witness, Muslim, and other minorities has frequently divided the court. The court's jurisprudence, based on legal principles applied to decide what is just, resembles how UU theology applies moral principles to distinguish right from wrong. In a 1930s decision, the justices reasoned that because, quote, "discrete and insular minorities have historically been victimized and are unable to defend themselves in the political arena, because the court then has a special responsibility to protect them against oppressive discrimination by the majority." Delegates to the upcoming UUA General Assembly will be voting on a proposed bylaws amendment that uses only slightly different words that commit us to combat, quote, "systemic injustice" by empowering, quote, "historically marginalized identities." That sounds quite like discrete and insular minorities. When interpreting constitutional guarantees that expand minority rights, liberal justices have applied an evolving standards approach that keeps our Constitution in tune with the times. Conservative justices, more supportive of democratic majority rule, have advocated an originalist or a textualist approach that preserves tradition. Their different approaches have resulted in narrowly decided cases accompanied by sharply worded dissenting opinions. Now, for those of you wanting to discuss their judgments about the cases I will summarize, and if you have follow-up factual questions for me, please note there is an optional "what say you" discussion in the chapel 20 minutes after the start of coffee hour. Since justices' different legal opinions are influenced by their personal religious values, as well as by their political ideology, their party affiliation, by their race and sex, I will be, in my descriptions, providing identifiers in summarizing case outcomes. For most of our history, only white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men served as justices on the Supreme Court. Today, roughly half of all Americans identify themselves as Protestant. Yet, from 2010 until 2017, the 9-member court had 6 Catholic justices, 3 Jews, and not a single Protestant. The 2 First Amendment cases recounted in the story for all ages reveal that despite their shared background in the Jewish minority community, a discrete and insular minority, 2 of the justices voted for different free exercise outcomes. Despite widespread anti-Semitism and the Nazi Holocaust, Justice Frankfurter, a Jew, in 2 cases rejected the rights of Jehovah's Witnesses, another discrete and insular minority. In Barnett, 5 liberal Democratic Protestants and 1 liberal Catholic overruled Frankfurter's Gobitis decision, and thus limited the government's power to compel expression that violated a student's religious beliefs. By contrast, in the Tinker case, the court limited the state's power to silence UU's anti-war expression in a majority opinion written by Abe Fortas, who occupied the Jewish seat on the court once held by Frankfurter. Another Jewish justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, dissented from Catholic Justice Anthony Kennedy's opinion for a 7-member majority, upholding the right of a baker based on his religious objections to same-sex marriage that led him to reject a gay couple's request that he prepare their wedding cake. By the end of this month, the court will decide a very similar case involving a website designer who, based on her Christian religious principles that she posts online, refuses to prepare web pages for same-sex weddings. Now, should the Barnett precedents against state-mandated flag salute control a decision in her favor? Or should that precedent be distinguished or overruled? The State Civil Rights Commission in the case argued that granting the web designer an exception would open the door to a wide array of commercial discriminatory practices reminiscent of how racist Southern restaurants denied service to black customers. Catholic justices Thomas and Alito, who strongly support the free exercise rights of Christian petitioners like this website designer, have sought to overturn a precedent authored by Catholic Justice Scalia. He had rejected the free exercise claims of two Native American drug counselors fired as a result of their ingesting peyote in a religious ritual. Nor have Catholic justices been single-minded about the death penalty, despite the abolitionist position of their church doctrine. Justices Brennan and Sotomayor have vigorously dissented when their Catholic colleagues on the court have readily affirmed death sentences. LGBTQ+ rights and abortion cases both involve the court in deciding the constitutionality of restrictive state laws based on the religious values of those Catholic and Christian fundamentalist lawmakers who seek to promote morality by legally compelling others to respect their view of God's will. Initially, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of religiously motivated state laws that criminalized sodomy. However, 10 years later, in 2003, a 6-member majority overruled that precedent. Justice Anthony Kennedy, a moderate Republican Catholic, wrote the opinion, and 2 conservative Republican Catholics, Scalia and Thomas, dissented. After Cincinnati City Council amended a local ordinance in order to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation, citizens concerned for community values successfully campaigned for an amendment to the city charter that expressly barred adoption of such protection for gays and lesbians. In rejecting that amendment, finding it unconstitutional, the U.S. trial court judge in Cincinnati, Arthur Spiegel, reasoned not only that a discrete and insular minority was involved, but even if not, LGBTQ rights advocates were being denied their First Amendment free speech rights to petition the government. In another opinion, authored by the Catholic Justice Kennedy, the Supreme Court struck down an identical ban that Colorado voters had added to that state's constitution. Kennedy found it an arbitrary violation of fundamental rights, a law that served no legitimate government purpose. In 2015, Catholic Justice Kennedy also wrote the majority opinion establishing the constitutional right to gay marriage in a case that originated in Cincinnati, Obergefell versus Hodges. UU civil rights attorney Al Gerretstein represented Obergefell. U.S. trial court judge Timothy Black, also a member of First Unitarian, ruled that the Constitution required Ohio to give full faith and credit to the validity of a same-sex marriage that had been performed legally in Maryland, even though it would not have been allowed in this state. A second Catholic Justice, Sotomayor, joined Kennedy's 5-member majority, as did all 3 Jews on the court, in a broad 14th Amendment equal protection holding that required all states to allow same-sex marriage. 4 other Catholic justices dissented. At the 2016 UUA the next year, the General Assembly in Columbus, Al Gerretstein received the Lifetime Achievement Award for his success in advancing not only LGBTQ rights, but also his extraordinary service promoting racial justice and abortion rights. He was the attorney for Planned Parenthood. In 2020, the court ruled in favor of a transgender funeral home employee who was fired after transitioning from male to female. The 6-member majority found the employer in violation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Title VII prohibits sex discrimination as well as race discrimination. Justice Gorsuch, raised a Catholic, authored that opinion, finding that the textual reference to sex discrimination clearly applied to a transgender employee. Catholic Chief Justice Roberts, Catholic Justice Sotomayor, and the 3 Jewish justices all agreed. 3 Catholic justices, Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh, dissented. Despite their setbacks, religiously motivated conservatives are confident that the 3 Republican justices appointed by President Trump will form a 6-member majority that overturns liberal precedent, that rejects as unconstitutional state laws separating church and state, and will uphold newly enacted morality laws enforcing biblical commands. According to the Human Rights Campaign, Ohio is currently one of nearly 24 states introducing a record number of anti-LGBTQ plus bills, at least 340 in state houses across the nation. The court may soon be asked to rule on whether, based on the Colorado LGBT precedent, that new state laws banning local jurisdictions from adopting anti-discrimination laws on behalf of transgender persons, whether those also violate the First Amendment. Since John Roberts became Chief Justice in 2005, he has managed to reverse the long-standing Supreme Court ban on the use of tax dollars to support private religious schools. That ban was mandated in a precedent authored by an earlier Republican Chief Justice. Warren Burger had ruled that even if such funds would serve the secular purpose of advancing education without significantly promoting any religion, it would still be unconstitutional because of an unacceptable entanglement of church and state that would foment the type of Protestant versus Catholic antagonism the framers had sought to avoid. In overruling that precedent, Roberts, with a new conservative majority, has ruled that states providing tax dollars for private secular schools must also provide them to religious schools. And this term, the court's likely to go even beyond that and say that even if no monies go to private secular schools, it would violate the free exercise rights if tax dollars were denied to the parochial schools. In a 1993 opinion, I'm going to shift now to abortion. Italian-American Catholic Justice Samuel Alito's opinion last year, overturning Roe v. Wade, confirmed for liberal Democratic critics that church doctrine now trumps legal principle for the court's new majority. In that Dobbs case, 4 conservative justices supported Alito's majority holding that overruled the 50-year-old precedent, Roe versus Wade. Justice Roberts reached the same result, but he wrote a concurring opinion that did not overrule Roe versus Wade, but he still would have allowed a state ban on abortions after 15 weeks to go into effect. And that could be done, in his view, based upon a 1993 abortion decision that had cut back on Roe v. Wade. Blackmun's 1973 Roe decision had broadly protected a woman's right to choose abortion during the first trimester of her pregnancy. But during the second trimester, that opinion approved state limits that were intended to protect a woman against a dangerous medical procedure. And during the third trimester, the state could impose nearly a total ban, with an exception in case the mother's life was endangered. And the state's interest was in the viability of the fetus that in the third trimester could live outside the womb. But by 1993, 20 years later, that viability was possible much earlier in pregnancy. And so 30 years ago, the court majority abandoned the trimester framework and replaced it with one that allowed numerous restrictions on the right to abortion, including severe limits much earlier in the second trimester. So what was at issue in the Dobbs case argued last year was whether a Mississippi ban that took effect after 15 weeks, which is about what the law is in Europe, whether that violated the Roe versus Wade precedent or the Constitution. Even before the court heard oral argument in that case, Texas adopted a 6-week ban after 6 weeks. And the court majority over Roberts' dissent allowed that ban to take effect even before they heard oral argument in the Dobbs case in December. So like Roberts, Justice Alito has strategically worked to advance the interests of Christians in a range of cases that have involved their right to refuse adoption of gay children, the right of an employer under his health plan to deny contraceptives to employees, and during the pandemic, limits on church attendance and requirements for vaccination. Now, Alito's approach to result-oriented jurisprudence resembles the earlier strategic initiatives by a liberal Irish-American Catholic, Justice William Brennan, who was a principal architect of Roe versus Wade. Before that case was decided, he got to write the opinion in a case involving the right to use and purchase contraceptives. Now, all he had to do in that law was strike down the law saying there was a privacy right that constitutionally protected whether or not you chose to beget a child. But he went further, and he said the constitutional right also extends on a decision whether to bear a child, forecasting where he wanted the court to go on abortion. Now, that was contrary to his Catholic Church doctrine. But more in keeping with Catholic doctrine, Brennan also wrote dissenting opinions in death penalty cases, arguing that capital punishment was unconstitutional. And in a 14th Amendment equal protection women's rights case that was argued by Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the ACLU, Brennan fell just one vote short of winning a majority to make sex discrimination as unconstitutional as race discrimination. So, from the perspective of this political scientist who holds a law degree, the religious ministry of the justices in our civil religion is more determined by their political ideology than by the dictates of their belief in a particular faith tradition. When the most active, result-oriented, liberal or conservative justices seek to move the law significantly, either forward or backward, their ministry may both reflect and exacerbate a cultural schism. Thus endeth my overly academic lecture on issues that I presented devoid of my sharing any of the heartfelt joy and anger that I feel when I like or am outraged by decisions of the Supreme Court. I urge those of you who have strong feelings and want to voice them to follow up in what say you, and I'll answer any questions you have, but I hope to have an opportunity to hear differences of opinion by people who can disagree with one another without being disagreeable. So, I was told that some of our youth, when reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to this flag, rather than say at school, under God, they say, under frog. So that might be a starting point for a follow-up intergenerational conversation after the service. Blessed be. Oh, we have a hymn.
Oh, Debbie was to do announcements first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have it right here. It's time for announcements, and Debbie has one to deliver in person.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Combs. I was sent this little saying by Linda Heath, and it relates directly to what I want to talk about. And it says, just because a space is empty doesn't mean it's available to fill with stuff. Okay? So, I'm part of a decluttering group, and I'm going to tell you the story of this lovely wine bag, okay? It's got a very nice map on it. So, this bag belonged to Nancy Henry. She's not exactly sure how it came to St. John's, but she's sure it contained a bottle of wine. The decluttering group started work in April and found this bag on a shelf in the coat room. We moved it to a table in the back of Curl Pfeiffer to either be claimed or taken home as a giveaway. Later, I noticed the bag is back on the shelf of the coat room, along with a stack of books. We had a box of books in the back of Curl Pfeiffer for anyone to take. So today, I'll put this bag back on the shelf in the coat room along with the books. If the person who wanted the bag and the books is here, please take everything home. I don't need to know who you are. If the bag and the books are still there in a week, I'll make them part of the next giveaway. So, just to let you know, the Declutter group needs your help. Of course, you can join our efforts. Our next Declutter date is this Friday at 10:30. But the most important thing you can do to help is, please don't clutter areas that we've decluttered. Or, as my mother used to say, pick up after yourself, Debbie. For a little extra information, everyone in the Declutter group is in their 70s or 80s. We can use all the help we can get. So I'm sending a special thank you to Jeff, our caretaker. We couldn't have made the progress we made on Thursday without him. So our goal is to get the building in shape for the arrival of our interim minister, Reverend Jen, on August 1st. And I will put the wine bag in the coat room. Thank you.
I was told not to touch this. I have acknowledgments to make to at least 10 people in the extraordinary team that made possible this service. I can't tell you how impressed I am at the strength of the volunteers that manage these weekly services. Reverend Alice coached me from day one until today, and her fingerprints are all over what we've done here. Our former music director, Kathy Roma, recommended at my request the music that Stephen so graciously accepted to play in special music, searching out a special tune. And when I showed Stephen 3 of our patriotic hymns, his eyes lit up and said, "Battle Hymn of the Republic" for the postlude. Bo, thank you so much for leading us in song. Thanks to Ashley for collaborating in the, thank you, Claire, in the lessoning. Roberto has been a gem in projecting everything I wanted on screen. Bridget for co-hosting on the YouTube, and maybe we'll get some chats to talk about. Nancy Greenlee, our office administrator for the e-news and the announcements. To Nina for helping out, reading over my sermon, helping me tweak it, and then doing the singing bowl. And I can't say enough about my partner, our worship associate, Claire, who has done the announcements on Facebook and on the website and done such a fine job here during the service today. And she will take over again to do the extinguishing of our chalice.
I think we have a hymn first.
Oh, we do have a hymn first, thank you.
This is number 354, We Laugh, We Cry.
as Howard extinguishes the flame. We do extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen.
For the benediction, be ours a religion, like sunshine that goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. Blessed be.